So Bethel's always been on my horizon. My mother went to Bethel. I grew up in a small Baptist General Conference, now Converged Church. Any given day, 40 was pretty much the max. I remember sitting through business meetings as a child, and first we paid the operating expenses, then we paid Bethel, then we paid missionaries. So Bethel was always part of our conversation. Many family members came to Bethel, and it was sort of the best option. All right, why wouldn't I? And it was a good choice. It's a good choice for me. I think my sophomore year, I had 17 relatives here with me. So I think you could say we were committed. I have a double major in political science and English lit. It was a great combination. Poli-sci taught me systems thinking. English lit taught me analytical and writing skills, and put it together and went into business. While at Bethel, I was one of those who pretty much put myself through school, worked, 30 some hours a week. I was a student worker. Big chunk of that was in the library, and that ties to some mentorship later on. I worked the cafeteria, I worked in facilities, worked in a lot of places and got to know a lot of people. I was a resident assistant, and then upon graduation, a resident director while I was in graduate school. And then, as I mentioned, the career development office was beginning to move from a placement office to a full-fledged career development office, and that gave me an opportunity to explore a career choice or an area that ultimately became my career choice in terms of I'm all about talent. I'm all about people's exposure to talent opportunities, figuring out how to leverage that against business strategy. And that was really an entree into that, and was given quite a bit of freedom to explore that field with Dr. Radine. Through then, the other connections, when I did move to a corporate setting that included recruitment opportunities, would often send teams to Bethel to recruit students for their first post-grad opportunity. Occasionally, I've been a speaker either in a career development room or a couple times in the business department around human capital strategies, Bethel Biz, things like that. So kind of kept some of those connections, not a lot, just enough over time. And then probably the most significant experience was being on the Bethel board. I was recruited by Dr. Brushhopper, and then my first board meeting was Jay Barnes's first board meeting as president, and my last board meeting was his last board meeting as president. And through that, had the opportunity to serve on a number of committees, finance, compensation and performance, governance, that sort of thing. And then my last 2 years of that, I served as board chair. Which was really a growth opportunity for me, an opportunity to give back in a different way and to help navigate in terms of the transition we were working through. And then I would be remiss to say, if I didn't say, Bethel Build program. I had the opportunity to pitch the idea to Jay and his team when I was overselling, and he told me 3 times in the pitch he had already bought. I was thrilled, and we went to work together, a number of us, and built the Bethel Build program. And we've just finalized our, I want to say, the 10th cohort. So, and with that comes being a donor, right? All those good things. So it's kind of a fun tapestry. Keep in mind, it's the early 70s. We're in kind of ragged endings of a Vietnam War. We're starting to see more opportunity for women, but not an easy path necessarily. My class was the last class that started on, class was the first class that started full-time classes on new campus. So We actually postponed beginning of the year it was postponed by 2 weeks to finish the campus. We were housed on old campus. They bussed us out here, and we were the beginning of this new adventure. And I think it's pretty symbolic. The tininess, the more boundary-given old campus, the nostalgia, the history. There was a transformation as we began to fill this new campus. There was lots of conversations about the world we were becoming versus the world we had been, given a number of things in the culture of the world, and I think that the student population, the faculty population embraced that differently. Okay, differently than the past, not necessarily differently from each other, but it was a growth time, and that's a very compelling image that I have walking up the steps by the gym, first gym. And that feeling of new and big and current and different. Okay? It was, I think, a very transformational part for the university, then college. Some other things, enrollment was growing. Like, you know, I'm a baby boomer at the height of high school graduations, at the time when people are pro-education, and all the beginnings and resounding images of a college education will take you further. A liberal arts education will prepare you for next steps. And that was really strong rhetoric throughout high school, throughout first days of college. And I think Bethel took its place in that and worked to fulfill that message. The other thing is, I'm pretty sure my years, the student body was much more homogeneous than it is now, not only around race and ethnicity, but a more homogeneous core around what faith meant. And the paths coming to Bethel were less diverse than they are now. And so there was a given that, you know, we're all starting at a somewhat similarly situated path in place, not completely. But with that also comes a tone of not rebellion as much as, do I own this? And to some degree, really hard questioning on the authentic piece of faith, okay? Our parents' faith had sent us, okay? And just my years on the board, you know, that's, I think, a possible different differentiator given the decades in between. Well, first I'm going to tell you a little story about one big change that was really impactful to the women, okay, at Bethel. So I arrive in September of '72. I'm going to live in Bodine on old campus, the dorm my mother lived in the 40s, late 40s. My mother's words to me were, Julie, I know women still have curfews and men don't. But don't you worry, I can show you which windows to use. This is my mother's advice going to Bethel. I said, well, that's fine, you can show me that. But I commit to you, I will not be coming home at Christmas if women still have a curfew. This sounds like a little thing right now, but a handful of us went to work on, and this was a women's rights issue. And if we had to be managed differently, then we had the potential of being taught differently. And we had the potential of being thought of differently. Well, suffice it to say, I went home for Christmas. And when we came back, women did not have a curfew. Now, I'm not saying taking all the credit for that. That may have been in the works. But that was a tone in the early 70s. If you manage the women, you can manage the men. Okay? There was this mental model of, no one's going to want to be out if half the population can't be out. So just keep in mind the time frame, okay? Which I then think set that plus a few other things started to set a tone of more verbalization about perspective by women, how things were interpreted, what the experience looked like, and began a dialogue around leadership roles on campus, which had been traditionally more male, not completely, but just an assumption of more conversation around the role of men and women, usually focused on the role of women, because if we got that part of the formula right, well, I guess we get the rest of the formula right. And that kind of thinking began to emerge. What I experience on campus now and over my years is there's much more balance and rhythm and mutual expectations around gender in terms of, and this is not language I necessarily used back then, but language that I have used in my career that I think was seeded in my experience here. We are both about performance and potential. And there's a balance between looking at both as we educate and as we bring people into this whole university experience. And I think it's a change that's kind of crept up, not only at Bethel, but across society. But to me, it seems very real here. So a couple of things. I purposely tried to talk to as many people as I could to understand their experience and not assume it was my experience. We've had a number of friends who've had children here throughout the years. So, had some context for that experience here at Bethel. Listening, trying to connect with just the experience, right? Whether it's students coming into the board meeting or us as board members going out to meet with, to try to take advantage of all those opportunities and to just really set my lens aside as much as possible, which is not always easy to do, but what's the experience of today? And I think I would say that I had to do that in the work site every day. My employment experience wasn't the same as everybody else's, so how do you do that? I read a lot, read all the Clarions, read all the reports, try and get a sense of that. I'm going to go back a bit as to why this might be important, okay? So I'm going to just say unequivocally that the family connection to the school was eminently important and set me on that stage, okay? So my grandmother, widowed at 33, 5 daughters, ages 2 months to 7 years. She had a 3rd grade education. Every one of those daughters went to Bethel. Many finished their degree at St. Cloud, okay? Number one, you can do anything you put your mind to, okay? My mother, pro-Bethel, pro-education, as was my father. First career was, she was an English and drama teacher. And 40, she changed careers and became a nurse so that she could put us through school as much as possible. And at 48, she was disabled due to a car accident. Always, you can do what you set your mind to. I can teach, I can learn to walk again, I can raise 5 daughters, okay? My mother introduced me at an early age to Marilyn Starr because they were best friends and troublemakers growing up. Now, Marilyn was the Dean of Women at the time. Marilyn was never clingy to me, but she was always free to give me her opinion and available if needed. And her ability to navigate her career was inspirational. Other women I had put on that list, I didn't have a lot of women faculty members. And I don't know if you've heard this name in these interviews, but Janine Bohmeyer, an English professor, was often considered kind of shy and retiring. She invested in myself and a couple of other students in a big way, pushed us hard academically, but also pushed us hard to explore the world. We talked earlier about Tricia Brownlee. I watched her and worked with her when I was in the career development office as she navigated from faculty to administration, and her perceptive mind and what she did was inspirational. And then I had a boss in the library. I worked in the periodicals department, and my manager for most of my years was Ann Dalton Workman. Ann was the oldest daughter of Doc Dalton, okay, and Ann was formidable, okay. She was just absolutely a delight. And we worked together side by side, and in that, we navigated career conversations and academic conversations. And again, it's how do you perform? What's your potential? How are you going to work that out? What's your balance? What does that look like? And I would put those women, I mean, there were others too, but those are the ones that truly spoke to me. On the board, Laura McKnight is currently a board member. Laura and I went to Bethel together, reconnected on the board, and not many weeks go by that we're not kicking some ideas around or working on some things. Yeah, there's a few, but well, I think that per our earlier comments about kind of this societal shifts that, and you add faith-based with lots of views on shoulds and shouldn'ts and roles and opportunities, and which I would all label under, an undefined power struggle of some kind. Yes, it can be very difficult in these scenarios. It's if you look at the corporate side, we've cracked a lot of glass, okay? Quite frankly, in my opinion, in my experience, it's way easier to crack that glass in a non-faith-based scenario, okay? You deal with conflict differently in many cases. So to take it to Bethel and other faith-based organizations, there's oftentimes, not always and not by everyone, and both men and women, okay? So this isn't one against the other. There's a lot of assumptions set still on appropriate leadership behavior. I'm very direct, okay? I have been asked to change that, and I choose to be who I am. Now, I can be more kind in that, but there's still some double standards in our world. And quite frankly, if all you history people will tell me, if history repeats itself and we're cycling back into something, we may be reviewing those roles again. As I listen to younger generations talk about, do I want both career and family? Do I have to say I want both? What does that look like? Those conversations get germinated in a place that you're studying at. And so, yeah, I think it can be difficult. I don't think it's impossible, and I think we probably make it more difficult than it needs to be. I may just be an odd animal, I don't know. Yes, I was here in the era of getting your diploma after 4 years was one thing, having a ring on your hand sometimes trumped that, okay? That just has never been who I was or am. And so, frankly, I avoided those conversations as much as possible. I never really heard it from faculty, did not hear it from faculty, but certainly there was some pressure by some family members for people. Not my family member, not my family, but certainly was that pressure. What does success look like? It was also at a period of time where, so it's always complex. It's never one thing. It was also a period of time where more women wanted to go on to seminary, okay? And that was not a norm. And It's, can you do both? What does that look like? And so among students, there were those conversations, and probably amongst the closest mentoring, like I could have that conversation with Ann Dalton Workman, but I may not have that conversation with everyone I had on my list, you know. But that was an interesting era, you know. Still maybe is. I don't think so. I think it's different, but. So when I was here, there was a revamping of what student affairs looked like. And it was staffed differently for the first time. I don't remember all the details, but I do remember the rolling out of more, less about rules and more about opportunity, less about this is our stance, and more about dialogue and how that was managed through it. And because I worked in that office, I could hear and see some of those conversations, and that to me was a pretty big turning point, okay? Rolling forward, kind of when we're in the height of numbers graduating and that sort of thing, I clearly, from an employment standpoint, started to see more Bethel grads in more places. So a bigger reach out, a bigger set of expectations around employability or graduate school. Now, medical school and law school had always been, there had been great placement rates, okay. But we started, as the business department got built, we started to see and have continued to see more graduates in more kinds of places, in addition to where that we've always been. Education was always big, medical school and law school was always big, seminary was always big, but the net got spread from a stronger, I think, liberal arts standpoint. And Bethel grads were well received. I think other pivotal points, so more current day, a stronger message and plan around diversity and what that looks like in a faith-based organization. Again, in a corporate world, my era, it was all about employability, less about social issues, more, but you know, we employ all, right? I think places like Bethel, and Bethel in specific, having a need to explore what that means and maintain its core has been a pretty big pivotal piece. One of the homogeneous pieces, at least I seem to have heard about in my era, was more students came more similarly academically prepared than not, okay? So a class of 30, yeah, you know, we all might be on a scale in terms of how well we did in it, but the preparation was more consistent, is what I seem to remember. Now, I think given just so many factors, I'm guessing faculty and staff have to scurry a lot more in terms of how to prepare, what to prepare, how hard to push, what's the expectation around performance. So I think that's pivotal. And I just really think the ongoing transition of the economic model at a place like Bethel, well, you're never done, right? You're never done, but it does sharpen the pencil in terms of what you do and how you do it. And I think that's an ongoing transformation. You know, clearly the spiritual transformation has encompassed the more diverse student inputs. There's more of a seeker acceptance than in my era, which, you know, Bethel's a mission field too, right? You know, there were a handful of women. It was relatively new. So two things happened. George recruited Dr. Brushhaber recruited the last round for Dr. Barnes's tenure, okay? And certainly it ebbed and flowed. And he recruited more women, okay? And more diverse backgrounds. And in fact, and the other factor was the board was grown exponentially. So it had gone from a pretty small handful of pretty senior men to a larger, more diverse board, which required us to do a relook at governance and what that meant to be a board member. And my first year, we redid, updated and built a board primer and a governance document and the bylaws to reflect what the board was desired to do and be. Okay, so that was a pretty big moment. In terms of women, many were recruited. I think I started with, or in the first couple of years, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7. It was uncharted territory, and I would say more were relatively quiet on the board than outspoken. Not all, okay? And so there was a learning curve. There was a learning curve for the board chairs, so, okay. I spend my life coaching people, right? So I'm always the one that gets asked, what do you think about? Okay, so between meetings, I often had conversations with the board chair around dynamics and, I mean, I walked into one meeting and all the women were on one side and all the men were on another side. And I went, whoa, we're not going to do that. Or all the men were on the finance committee and all the women were on, academic, whatever. Both are important, but if you're going to diversify the board for the right reasons, you need to diversify the next steps, okay? So at lunch, we don't clump, right? We don't finish our board discussion in the restrooms respectfully, okay? There were cultural things that the board had to address. I would say we addressed them kindly and pretty effectively, and that both men and women were trying to figure out how to navigate this change. And it was great. It was an important, that was a first. To my knowledge, that was relatively well accepted. I don't, my outspokenness is more of an issue probably than my gender, but, just let's get to the heart of the matter. I found that experience to be very positive in terms of building groups and teams and alignment, and we wrestled with some pretty big things. I also put a rule in place, not very rules-minded, but rule in place is, if you can't talk about it in the room, don't talk about it to me in the hallway, in hopes that I will talk about it in the room. We're all adults here. So we built in, and I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, we continued to build in what dialogue looked like, balanced with the role of the board versus management, and that's just an ongoing thing in every board, because boards transition over, and then you got to start again. Yeah, I was the board chair, and Jim Green was the search chair. Interestingly enough, at Press Homes, I'm the search chair, and he's the board chair. So I would say in every role for every person, male or female, you go through a learning curve with each group that you join, be it an executive team or a board or whatever. And, your personality determines a lot of that. And so the person who's like going to be wanting to be perceived as the person, they come in pretty hard and fast into any room. I tend to come in prepared, but also giving myself grace to watch for a meeting or two, to see where the power plays are going to be, to see who the opinion leaders are and what that looks like. So I used the same approach coming into the Bethel board. Now the interesting thing was my class that started, there were 6 of us that started together, and we kind of all sought each other out on that learning curve. Okay, and I was the only female in that group, but 5 wonderful men, and we kind of carried us through in a lot of ways in terms of that learning curve. I think the difference is, in most settings I go to, people expect everyone to participate, right? In the corporate world, you are always mentally calculating, am I contributing here or not? Is the meeting going too long or not? Because I can pretty much calculate how much money we're spending being in here, okay? I think that the response for when women were speaking up at Bethel, and early on it was, I would share an idea. It was new. And somebody felt a need to repeat me and own the idea. That is not an uncommon experience for women. Now, we can say that is how the world can work, all right? Or we can say we own our destiny. So when I find myself in that situation, and someone's doing that to me repeatedly, I would say, and I would say this in the Bethel board, oh, wasn't I clear when I shared that idea? Or thank you for reinforcing. At least there's 2 of us that seem to agree. So we have to take matters into our own hand in a kind way, right? Or we can go home and be mad that it happened. And, you know, I just choose to, and I've been schooled to and mentored to, don't let it just go. So yeah, there's some difficult times, right? I do want to just reinforce, I did not have the language for this when I was here, but I truly have built a career on some learnings here where, whether it was a faculty member or a manager of one of the many jobs I had, or others, it was always a balance between performance and potential. So you can have a bad exam, okay, or a bad day. We still talked about potential. And that whole concept has carried me through. Also, the art of dialogue, which we talk a lot about in this divisive world. One experience that I had that I don't think many had was because I worked in the library, and I worked here all summers, okay, and I lived on campus. In summers, you know, a different vibe on campus, right? I could find parking today. And because I worked for Anne, we, many days, not every day, many days, would take our lunch down to what was the Doc Dalton corner at the time. And there was a little conference room in there. And many days I would have lunch with Doc Dalton and G.W. Carlson and Jim Johnson and Bill Johnson and other people of, you know, the social work, Belton and others, where it was an awesome experience to witness firsthand the art of influence and conflict management and brotherly love, okay? I mean, it was truly an educational opportunity that had I not worked there, I would not have seen firsthand. And it was really compelling to me. So those lessons come in all those places, right? And it was really important to me. And some people were a little jealous of it. It's like, well, I'm inventorying every book in the library. I should get a break at lunch. It was good. Very personal story around Build. So our daughter, Emily, is now 37. She has intellectual disabilities due to Down syndrome. When she graduated from high school, there were literally 2 or 3 programs in the United States. And she was adamant that she was going to go to college. And they were very competitive at the time, still somewhat competitive, but there are more programs now. So Emily was accepted into the National Lewis PACE program in Skokie, Illinois, and off she went to college. Dropped her off like everyone else. She loved it. She grew. It was hard. On her graduation day, we asked her, Emily, what did you miss the most when you were away at school? And there was no spiritual component to this program, and there was no bus service. She said, I missed my church and my Bible study. I thought she was going to say her mother, but she didn't. Okay. And it was just this void in her life. She was very prepped for independent living and, employment and all that, but there was this void. And then we asked her, we said, Emily, what was the hardest thing about being away at school and the PACE program? And she said, Mother, it was all hard, but I had to do it so I could live my own life. Okay? So we started thinking, and we started praying, we started talking, and we pitched the program to Jay and his team. And the timing was right, the message was right. Emily wrote the first donation check from her employment fund. She's, so it is very personal because we see the benefits of the faith-based academic rigor, the independence that comes from it. And for all of us, anything we can do for ourselves and somebody else doesn't have to do, they can serve someone else. So Emily's a testimony to that independence, and we wanted to share that. Clearly, I love this place. It's very meaningful in my life. I should also say I met my husband here. I should probably say that. But we didn't connect until 4 years later. Okay, so literally, we didn't connect. So my hope, my dream, my prayer is that the pulse of Jesus and the academic rigor and the ability to influence the world we live in through both performance and potential and spiritual guidance continues to just pulse. And it's well beyond this community. It's around the world. I have colleagues that went to Bethel with me that are around the world doing amazing things, all in the name of Jesus, and all because we were well prepared. Different walks of life. Now, with that comes a host of strategies that I'm not close enough anymore, but so what's the right thing in terms of the application process? What's the right pool? What are the right programs? Okay. I think continuing to be creative and innovative. I think when you set up the digital history major, I think I sent you a note that said yes. Okay. I still believe there's a mini business degree partnered with a vocational school, okay, that addresses the employability of the masses going forward. I think there's just huge potential to create, and I suspect there's a pretty huge potential of some mergers, okay, with other institutions or partnerships or joint ventures. I would encourage us not to be afraid of those and not to get stuck in our ruts around, well, we have to retain this and we have to retain that. Well, there are some things that have to be retained. What are those common things? And then what's the possibility, okay? I just think don't be shy. Don't be risk adverse. Be prudent, but seize opportunities to expand the message and whatever footprint means, be that online, be that through influence, be that campuses, places like Bethel, and Bethel specifically, have to thrive and survive. Have to.